Hello friends, we are attempting the Big Book Test 4 Section 1 Flatfish passage in this video. If you have not read the passage earlier, it would be a good time to pause the video and just read the passage once. We are going to read the passage together as well. So flatfish, such as the flounder, are among the few vertebrates that lack approximate bilateral symmetry. Okay, so the passage is about flatfish, such as the flounder, all right? Among the few vertebrates that lack something, okay? So what they lack is bilateral symmetry. Now, what is bilateral symmetry is then explained in the next sentence. Symmetry in which the structures to the left and right of the body's midline are mirror images. Okay, so just like humans have bilateral symmetry, one eye to the left, one to the right, or, you have two hands and two legs. So that would be a bilateral symmetry. And the passage is saying that flatfish, such as the flounder, they lack bilateral symmetry. Okay. All right, let's read ahead. Most striking among the many asymmetries evident in an adult flatfish is eye placement. Okay, so there are many asymmetries, okay, in adult flatfish, and one of them, most striking, is the eye placement. Okay. All right. So what we are underlining is basically what is important for us to, understand the passage properly. Of course, you do not really get the option of underlining when you're taking the tests. But then, for our practice, we need to do this bit. And with practice, we'll, automatically understand what to keep in mind and what to skip. And in order to reach that stage, we initially need to, underline and highlight things. Plus, this is good for explanation as well. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead with it. So most striking among the many asymmetries is eye placement. Okay, so what is this asymmetry? Let's look. Before maturity, one eye migrates so that in an adult flatfish, both eyes are on the same side of the head. Okay, so they're basically saying that in adult flatfishes, both eyes are on the same side of the head, not on two different sides, just like we have in humans. Okay, let's read ahead. While in most species with asymmetries, virtually all adults share the same asymmetry, members of the starry flounder species can be either left-eyed or right-eyed. Okay. So as soon as we encounter a word like while, we know that the author is talking about some kind of contrast here. And these kind of contrasts are really important for us to, understand in order to understand the entire passage. So I'm going to notice this line clearly, okay? I'm going to read this line clearly and kind of interpret it properly as well. So while in most species, all adults share the same asymmetry, okay? Members of the starry flounder species can either be left-eyed or right-eyed, okay? So this line is basically telling us that starry flounder species are a bit different from most other species with asymmetries, okay? So this line is basically standing out for this reason, all right? Let's read ahead. In the waters between the US and Japan, the starry flounder populations vary from about 50% left-eyed off the US coast through about 70% left-eyed in other parts. Okay, all right, to nearly 100% left-eyed of the Japanese coast. Okay, so the passage is saying that the population also varies. Population of starry flounder varies from 50% left-eyed to 70% left-eyed. Okay, so it's not really constant. Okay, that's what they're saying. So there are basically 2 points of difference that the passage has mentioned till now about the starry flounder species. One is what we just read here. And second is what we are reading here, that the population varies from about 50% left-eyed to about 100% left-eyed. Okay, so there are these 2 points of difference that set the starry flounder species apart from the other species with asymmetry. Okay, now let's read ahead again. Biologists call this kind of gradual variation over a certain geographical range a cline. Okay. So now we are reading the word biologists here. So let's understand that the first para was kind of an introduction. Okay. So the first para has talked about flatfishes, they're being asymmetrical. Then the starry flounder species, which is again different from the normal flatfishes. Okay. All right. And then the next para, second para, is now talking about biologists. Okay. So biologists call this kind of gradual variation over a certain geographical range a cline and interpret clines as indications that the variation is adaptive. Okay. So basically, biologists are saying that the variation is adaptive, a response to environmental differences. Okay, so from our general knowledge, we know that a species is adaptive means that it adapts itself to the environment, to the changes in the environment, and that's how during the process of evolution, the species remains for years, right? So biologists say that these variations are adaptive. Okay. For the starry flounder, this interpretation implies that a geometric difference between fish that are mirror images of one another is adaptive. That left-eyedness in the Japanese starry flounder has been selected for. So this is what the point of view of biologists is. Okay. Their stand is that this geometric difference or this asymmetry that we're talking about, it has been selected for, which provokes a perplexing question. Okay, so we'll have to read the question clearly, because usually in a passage when there is a question that has been put forward, the passage then tries to answer that question, right? And at the end, the passage always concludes with what is the answer to that question. And mostly following the RC passage, there are these 3-4 questions, and these questions are usually based on such kind of discussion that has happened in the passage. Okay, so whenever a passage is putting forward a question, especially when it is saying that it is a perplexing question, just like it is saying here, we need to read that question clearly. Okay. So what is this perplexing question? What is the selective advantage in having both eyes on one side rather than on the other? Okay, so the author is wondering, what is the selective advantage, okay, in having both eyes on one side rather than on the other? All right, now the passage will logically try to explain this, explain the answer to this question. Okay, let's read ahead to find out what is the answer according to the passage. The ease with which a fish can reverse the effect of the sightedness simply by turning around has caused biologists to study internal anatomy. Okay, especially the optic nerves for the answer. In all flatfish, the optic nerves cross. Okay, so this is kind of an explanation. Okay. In all flatfishes, the optic nerves cross so that the right optic nerve is joined to the brain's left side and vice versa. Okay, so this is the explanation of, this is what the biologists have found out about the internal anatomy of the flatfishes. Okay, this crossing introduces an asymmetry. Okay, then some biologist name has been mentioned here. This guy reasoned that, for example, a flatfish's left eye migrated when the right optic nerves. Okay, so what we're understanding here is that the biologists are saying that optic nerves cross in flatfishes. Okay, so normally what I would understand is that the left optic nerve, the nerve that basically goes from eye to the brain, so the left side would go to the brain's left side, and the right side of the eye's nerve would go to the brain's right side. This is what would happen logically. But then the biologists are telling us that in all flatfishes, the optic nerves cross. So the right nerve goes to the brain's left side, and the left nerve goes to the brain's right side. Okay, so this crossing introduces an asymmetry. Okay, and then the passage says, G.H. Parker reasoned that if, for example, a flatfish's left eye migrated when the right optic nerve was on top, there would be a twisting of nerves which might be mechanically disadvantageous. Okay. So in this para, the author is saying that biologists are trying to, understand this internal structure of the flatfishes. And what they're saying is that in flatfishes, the optic nerves cross, okay? And when this crossing happens, there is a possibility that there would be a twisting of nerves, and this twisting might be mechanically disadvantageous, okay? For starry flounders, then the left-eyed variety would be selected against, since in a starry flounder, the left optic nerve is uppermost, okay? So in this line here, the passage is saying that this disadvantage of a possible twisting of nerves is possible in the starry flounders also, okay? All right. So now let's read ahead. The problem with the above explanation. Okay. So when we read this line, we understand that whatever the explanation was in the paragraph just before this line, there's a problem with this explanation. Okay. So the author is going in the direction of, not agreeing to this explanation. Okay. So there's some problem with this explanation, and it was not really correct or good enough. All right. So what was the problem with the explanation? The Japanese starry flounder population is almost exclusively left-eyed, and natural selection never promotes a purely less advantageous variation. Okay. All right. So the biologists basically here in this para, the biologists were trying to explain something, right? What were they trying to explain? They were trying to explain what is the selective advantage in having both eyes on one side rather than the other, right? This is the question that the passage put forward. And then they were trying to understand whether there was some advantage in having both eyes on one side. But then they did not really find any advantage. But what they found out was a problem, right? There would be a twisting of nerves, which might be mechanically disadvantageous. So according to the passage, according to the biologists, they tried to, study the internal anatomy, and they found out that the selective advantage that they were talking about, that they were trying to find, they couldn't really find it, right? And then this para says, third para, the problem with the above explanation is that the Japanese starry flounder population is almost exclusively left-eyed, and natural selection never promotes a less advantageous variation, obviously, right? As other explanations proved equally untenable, okay? So not just this explanation, the one that is provided in para number 2 here, but even the other explanations, as other explanations proved equally untenable. So none of the explanations was good enough, basically, okay? Biologists concluded, okay? Biologists concluded. Now, again, this is a very important word for us here, okay? Whenever there's a word like, concluded or reasoned, it is actually very, very important for us to notice, because that is where the usually the conclusion to something lies, okay? The conclusion of the entire passage or conclusion to some discussion that was happening in the passage basically lies here. So we need to read this clearly. As other explanations proved equally untenable, biologists concluded that there is no important adaptive difference between the left-eyedness and right-eyedness. Okay. So the question given here was, what is the selective advantage in having both sides on one side rather than the other, right? And biologists were saying that this variation is adaptive, okay? But then here, biologists have concluded after all the discussion that there is no important adaptive difference between left-eyedness and right-eyedness, okay? So this is the conclusion to the biologists' stand that they have taken, all right? Okay, let's read ahead. This situation is one commonly encountered by evolutionary biologists. Okay, so this is pretty common. That is what the author is saying. Who must often decide whether a characteristic is adaptive or selectively neutral. As for the left-eyed and right-eyed flatfish, their difference appears to be an evolutionary terrain. Okay, the author has concluded here, okay, with saying that this situation is pretty common, okay? So nothing out of the ordinary for evolutionary biologists here, kind of normal conundrums. But yeah, the passage is not that easy for us as the situation is for the evolutionary biologists. Because this passage is based on biology, and if we are not from a science or specifically biology background, then it becomes a bit difficult to relate to these kind of passages, and that is why it's actually important to focus on keywords in the passage. Okay. Now let's look at the questions that are there and just try to understand what the passage is trying to finally ask. All right, let's look at the first question. According to the passage, starry flounder differ from most other species of flatfish. Okay, so we did read in paragraph 1 that starry flounders were a bit different from other species of flatfish. Let's go back to the passage. So yes, here I've actually removed the annotations, but then we can always go back because we do remember where it was, right? So yeah, while in most species with asymmetries, virtually all adults share the same asymmetry. Members of the starry flounder species can be either left-eyed or right-eyed. Okay, so the difference was that the normal species have similar asymmetry, but starry flounders do not have that similar asymmetry. Okay, this is what is different in the starry flounder species. Okay, so let's look at the options that we have for the question. So option A is not correct because they are saying that all flatfishes are not bilaterally symmetric. But then we need to tell how starry flounder species is different from other species of flatfish. Okay, so therefore we'll go ahead with option C, which says do not all share the same asymmetry, because this is given to us, right? So the correct option here would be option C, do not all share the same asymmetry. Okay. Look at the next question, question 22. The author would be most likely to agree with which of the following statements about left-eyedness and right-eyedness in the starry flounder. Okay. So when the question asks us this, the author would most likely agree to. So we have to answer basically what is 100% true according to the passage. Okay. Let's look at the three statements one by one. So the first one says there are adaptive variations by the starry flounder to environmental differences. So the biologists were saying that the variation is adaptive, a response to environmental differences. But then what was the conclusion? The conclusion was that there is no important adaptive difference between left-eyedness and right-eyedness. Okay. So this is where the question 22 first statement becomes incorrect for us. Okay, let's look at the second statement. They do not seem to give obvious selective advantages to the starry flounder. This is true because we read that the biologists were asking this question, right? What is the selective advantage in having both eyes on one side rather than on the other? And then in the conclusion, the biologists concluded that there's no adaptive difference and that two characteristics are genetically associated with some other adaptively significant characteristic. Okay, so the conclusion is opposite to what the biologists set out to find, right? That is why we can clearly say that statement second is correct in question 22, that they do not seem to give obvious selective advantages to the starry flounder. Okay. So second is correct. Look at the third statement. They occur in different proportions in different locations. Now this is obviously correct because the passage told us that the population varied from 50% of US, between US and Japan waters to 100%. So yes, this is absolutely correct, and therefore statement second and statement third are correct, and therefore the answer that we mark is option D, which is 2 and 3 only. Okay, let's look at question 23. So according to the passage, possible disadvantage associated with eye migration flatfish. So yes, there was a disadvantage that was very, very clearly given in the passage. Okay, let's look at the passage again, where this disadvantage was mentioned. And yeah, there would be a twisting of nerves which might be mechanically disadvantageous, right? So this is one of the problems that could be there with having both eyes on the same side. And let's go back and look at what the option is saying. Okay, so yeah, a possible disadvantage associated with eye migration is that the optic nerves can twist, because this word is directly given to us that twisting of nerves could be disadvantageous. Okay, so I hope all the three questions and the passage are clear to you. It would be a good idea to read the passage once more and just try to grasp everything, so that becomes easier for you to understand such passages. Thank you.